Hi, I'm Chris with Sanderson Test Prep, and continuing with our video series of an introduction to how to create a game in Game Lab. Right now we have our airplane. We can move it around the screen. We have bees that are, so let me reset it and run it. So we see that bees are coming across the screen. We can move around with our plane, but our airplane just kind of gets hit by the bees and nothing seems to happen. And the bees just fly right through it. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can introduce a way for the airplane to interact with the bees. So let's take a look at a function that is called setCollider. And we'll see how that allows our airplane to interact. So under sprites, if we scroll down, and it's going to be about halfway down in the blocks. So we're going to take setCollider and we're going to look at what setCollider does. So for this, here we want this to be for our plane. So let's type in plane. So that's going to set the collider for our plane. And so something's going to happen. It's going to recognize when our plane hits something. And for setCollider, you can have different kinds of shapes to it. So you could have a rectangle or a circle. And then you can also further specify how you want that to be aligned. So if you want it to be offset, where maybe you want the rectangle to be above or below the object, you can set these values in here for your function, for your x and y's, and you can also set the corresponding sizes. So you can, like make for a really tiny contact point, or you could make for a really large contact point by adjusting, this number here. So when you look at that set, like collider function, so here it tells you your x offset, your y offset, and then the corresponding height of that shape, meaning this rectangle. And then you can also rotate it. So if you wanted to add another value, maybe you can angle it at 45 degrees so that your collider shape, let's say it's a rectangle, so maybe instead of moving left to right, you wanted something to represent a collider, but your object was moving diagonally across the screen. So you would want to change that angle to be an angle that matches the movement. So those are all the features that you have. For our purposes here, though, we can, let's do a kind of a small contact point. We'll do maybe 10 for our rectangle height, and we'll leave the x and y offsets at 0. So what that means here is that our program is going to recognize when our plane collides with another sprite. And if another sprite comes within this rectangle, then it's going to recognize that some sort of collision took place. But we want something to happen when that collision takes place. So we don't want it to just get hit by the bee and then nothing happens. So it's helpful for the program to recognize it, but now in our draw function, something's going to change. So what do we want to happen when the bee hits the plane? Well, first things first, we don't want the bee to continue just flying right through the plane to the edge of the screen. So we want to create some type of functionality that if the plane is going to collide with the bee, then we want some type of change to take place. And so here, that is going to be what we see in here with a displace function. And we'll talk about the difference between when we have a collider, when we have a displacement, and then we're also going to introduce the destroy functionality here as well. So first, let's take a look at what happens when something displaces another figure. So here, this is going to be Sprite Displace, and we're going to put this inside of our draw function. So here, our bees are coming across the screen, and then we want to know, all right, well, what happens then if the airplane were to displace the bee? So if the plane displaces the bee, So we want to know what happens if this were to take place. Oops, sorry, I pulled this over too soon. I meant to pull that over after I introduced my control. But if the plane displaces the B, so now I can bring in that displace function. So here, so if plane displaces B, so first things first, we don't want the B to continue flying across the screen. So what we would like to happen in that situation where the plane displaces the B is that we are going to now reposition our B to start back at the right of the screen. So just like what happens when the B gets all the way to the left with this previous if function, so if the B's x value is less than 0, meaning it's off the screen to the left, then we're going to reposition that B all the way to the right. We're going to do the same thing here if the plane displaces the B. So it's going to be these same position functions that you see here. And just for practice, I'm going to show this as text and copy and paste it, because rather than bring in separate blocks each time, copy and paste with the text can oftentimes be a faster way to add that information to your code without having to bring in the blocks individually, because we are doing the exact same thing. We're just repositioning the B where it's going to be all the way to the right of the screen. And you can see here, so if the plane displaces the B, we're now going to have a new B, and it's going to be created at x equals 400, which means all the way to the right, and then a random y value that is somewhere towards this top half of the screen here. And let's check and see how that works. So if we run our function now, so we see that now when the plane collides with the B, it will displace the B, and the B will restart at the right side of the screen. And then if you dodge the B successfully and it makes it all the way to the other side, a new B is formed at the right as well. So that pattern will continue. And now we have it in our function where the plane can displace the B and we get a new B formed, or the B makes it all the way across the screen and then we still get a new B formed. So now the plane is actually interacting with the obstacle on screen. But what happens when that interaction takes place? We probably want to have something else included in the code that makes it so that we either get a few points or lose a few points, or lose a life or gain a life when we collect either a reward or run into an obstacle. So now that we know how to use the collider function to displace an obstacle, let's see how we can allow that to be reflected in our score. And we're going to introduce some negative points for obstacles, some positive points for rewards in our next lesson. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.